The DNA profile flickered on my computer screen like a digital fingerprint, its peaks and valleys as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. After 12 years of running Chicago's premier forensic genetics lab, I could read these genetic signatures the way poets read verse. But this particular profile made my blood run cold. It shouldn't have been there. More specifically, it shouldn't have matched anything in my personal database. My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez, and I've built my career on the principle that DNA doesn't lie. People do. Documents can be forged. Witnesses can be bought. But those 4 letters, ATGC, tell the absolute truth, every single time. The routine paternity test had come in that Tuesday morning like hundreds of others. A woman named Amanda Pierce needed confirmation that her 8-year-old daughter Lily belonged to a man she'd been involved with years ago. Standard procedure. Collect samples, run the analysis, generate the report. Simple, clinical, detached. But when I fed the child's profile into our system for the routine database check, a security measure to prevent processing errors, something unprecedented happened. The computer flagged a partial match. Not to Amanda Pierce. Not to the alleged father listed on the paperwork. To my husband Rick. I stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold in my suddenly trembling hands. There had to be an error. Rick's DNA was in my system only because we'd done one of those novelty ancestry tests 3 years ago, laughing as we discovered he was 12% Irish, and I had distant Scandinavian roots. A harmless bit of fun between a couple trying to distract themselves from another failed month of trying for a baby. But computers don't make mistakes about genetic markers. The match probability was undeniable. Rick Hawthorne had a 99.97% chance of being Lily Pierce's biological father. My scientific mind kicked into overdrive, cycling through explanations. Laboratory contamination? Impossible. We had strict protocols. Sample mix-up? I'd personally processed every step. Database error? I ran the comparison 3 more times. Same result. My husband of 12 years had a daughter I'd never heard of. I sat there in the sterile silence of my lab, surrounded by the machines that had made my reputation, and felt my entire world tilt on its axis. The centrifuges hummed their familiar rhythm. The air purifiers whispered their constant song, but everything sounded different now. Accusatory. Like they'd been keeping secrets too. My hands shook as I reached for my water bottle, the simple act of unscrewing the cap suddenly requiring enormous concentration. Lily Pierce. 8 years old. The math was brutal in its simplicity. She'd been conceived when Rick and I had been married for 4 years, right around the time he'd started his biggest real estate development project. The Millennium Plaza deal that had required so much travel and late nights. I remembered those months with painful clarity now. How understanding I'd been, how supportive. Rick would come home exhausted, smelling of expensive restaurants and client meetings, full of stories about difficult investors and complex negotiations. I'd massage his shoulders, bring him scotch, listen to his tales of corporate warfare while secretly proud that my husband was building something extraordinary. "You're so patient with me, Elena," he'd say, kissing my forehead. "Most wives wouldn't understand the pressure I'm under." But Rick hadn't been under pressure. He'd been under Amanda Pierce. The lab suddenly felt suffocating. I locked my computer screen and walked to the bathroom, my reflection in the fluorescent-lit mirror showing a woman I barely recognized. Pale, hollow-eyed, with the kind of shocked expression I'd seen on the faces of victims' families when I delivered devastating genetic evidence in court cases. Except this time, I was the victim. I splashed cold water on my face, the shock of it grounding me momentarily in physical sensation. "Think, Elena. You're a scientist. Approach this methodically. Gather data. Test hypotheses. Find truth." Back at my desk, I pulled up Amanda Pierce's information with the clinical detachment that had served me well in thousands of other cases. Marketing executive, age 34, specializing in luxury real estate campaigns. Her business address was 3 blocks from Rick's office. Her LinkedIn profile showed a career trajectory that seemed to parallel Rick's rise in the industry. Small projects initially, then increasingly prestigious developments. I cross-referenced her client list with Rick's project timeline. The correlation was undeniable. Amanda Pierce hadn't just worked with Hawthorne Development. She'd grown alongside it, her small firm seemingly dependent on contracts from my husband's company. The pieces fell together with the precise, inexorable logic of genetic inheritance. Rick had been working with Amanda for years. At some point, their professional relationship had become personal. 9 years ago, it had become biological. I spent the rest of the day in a strange, detached state, mechanically processing other samples while my personal world crumbled in the background. A custody dispute here, a paternity confirmation there. Each case a reminder that DNA reveals truths people desperately want to keep hidden. How many times had I delivered results that shattered families, ended relationships, or exposed decades of lies? Now I understood what it felt like to be on the receiving end. My phone buzzed throughout the day with texts from Rick. Working late again, don't wait up. Client dinner running long. Contract negotiations might go past midnight. Each message felt like a small knife between my ribs. How many of these late nights had been spent with Amanda and their daughter? That evening, Rick came home at nearly midnight, reeking of expensive cologne and offering the same tired excuses about client dinners and contract negotiations. I watched him from the kitchen doorway as he loosened his tie, and for the first time in years, really looked at him. Rick Hawthorne was still handsome at 42, with the kind of silver-touched confidence that made investors open their checkbooks and women turn their heads at restaurants. His suits were perfectly tailored, his smile practiced and charming, his entire presentation calibrated for maximum professional impact. But now I saw the calculation behind the charm. The way he automatically adjusted his story when he noticed my expression, the practiced ease with which he compartmentalized his life into neat little boxes. You look tired, Elena. Maybe you should get some rest. The concern in his voice sounded genuine. That was perhaps the most disturbing part. Rick had become so adept at lying that even his sympathy felt authentic. Maybe I should. I agreed, my voice steady despite the hurricane raging in my chest. I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling while Rick slept peacefully beside me. This was the man who'd held my hand during my father's funeral, who'd celebrated every professional milestone with champagne and pride, who'd whispered promises about the children we'd have when the time was right. The children we'd have. God, the cruel irony of it. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time in 3 years. Rick expressed appropriate concern, bringing me tea and checking my temperature with the solicitude of a devoted husband. After he left for the office, I drove to the Chicago Public Library with the grim determination of a detective pursuing a cold case. If Rick thought he could compartmentalize his life into neat little boxes, devoted husband here, secret father there, he'd underestimated the woman he'd married. I wasn't just a geneticist. I was a forensic geneticist. I found truth in the places people tried hardest to hide it. 3 hours of research revealed the scope of Rick's deception, and it was breathtaking in its complexity. Amanda Pierce wasn't just some random marketing executive who'd happened to catch my husband's eye. She'd been working with Hawthorne Development for nearly a decade, her small firm growing alongside Rick's empire in a way that suggested far more than professional competence. Her business registration showed she'd started Pierce Marketing just months after Rick had launched Hawthorne Development. Her early client list was suspiciously short, essentially just Rick's company and a few small projects that seemed designed more to establish credibility than generate significant revenue. But as Rick's business grew, so did Amanda's. Suddenly she was handling marketing for multimillion-dollar developments, earning consulting fees that seemed disproportionate to the services provided. Her company's financial filings, available through public business databases, showed a pattern of income that directly correlated with Rick's major projects. More damning were the financial records I could access through legitimate business databases. Shell companies with names like Strategic Communications LLC and Metropolitan Marketing Solutions. Entities that existed solely to funnel money from Hawthorne Development to Pierce Marketing. Retainer payments, consulting fees, and special project compensations that painted a clear picture of a man systematically redirecting marital assets to support his mistress. But the discovery that shattered what remained of my trust came from an unexpected source: medical tourism websites. I'd been searching for any travel records that might explain Rick's frequent business trips when I stumbled across a forum for men seeking discreet medical procedures abroad. The discussion threads were full of euphemisms and coded language, but the message was clear. Wealthy men avoiding domestic medical records by getting vasectomies in private Caribbean clinics. The timeline hit me like a physical blow. 9 years ago, Rick had taken a golf weekend to the Bahamas with his college buddy Jake. He'd returned refreshed and relaxed, joking about how he'd taken care of some personal business while getting sun and seafood. I'd been happy he was taking time for himself. He'd been so stressed about the Millennium Plaza project. 3 weeks later, Amanda Pierce would have been far enough along in her pregnancy to know for certain she was carrying Rick's child. I sat in the library parking lot, gripping my steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white, fighting the urge to scream or vomit or both. The scope of his betrayal was breathtaking. Not only had Rick been maintaining a secret family for nearly a decade, but he'd undergone surgery to ensure it could never happen again. Every conversation we'd had about children, every fertility discussion, every let's just give it more time conversation had been a performance. He'd let me believe something was wrong with one of us, that we were just unlucky, that timing and stress were preventing the family we both supposedly wanted. But Rick hadn't wanted children with me. The vasectomy proved that. He'd gotten exactly what he wanted from our marriage: social credibility, professional networking, financial stability, while building his real family with Amanda. I thought about all the times I'd wondered if something was wrong with me. The months I'd tracked my ovulation with scientific precision, adjusting my diet and exercise routine, taking vitamins and reducing stress, all while my husband secretly laughed at my efforts because he knew they were futile. The cruelty of it was staggering. But there was more. In recent months, Rick had started pushing for us to finally get serious about having kids. Just last week, he'd scheduled an appointment with Dr. Morrison, Chicago's top fertility specialist, suggesting we start with comprehensive testing for both of us. "I think it's time we got some professional help," he'd said over dinner, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "We've been trying for so long, and I know how much this means to you." The appointment was scheduled for next month. Rick had specifically requested that I be tested first, citing statistics about female fertility declining after 35. Sitting in that parking lot, I realized the full scope of his plan. Rick intended to let me undergo every invasive test, every painful procedure, every hormone injection and emotional roller coaster that fertility treatment entailed, all while knowing he was sterile by choice. He would let me blame myself. Let me think my body was failing us. Let me endure the psychological torture of unexplained infertility while he played the supportive husband, holding my hand through procedures that could never work because he'd made sure they couldn't. The monster I'd married had planned to let me destroy myself trying to give him something he'd already taken from someone else. That night, I cooked Rick's favorite meal, herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables, and watched him eat while he told me about his day. He was excited about a new project, a mixed-use development that would require extensive community outreach and marketing support. "I'm thinking of bringing in Amanda Pierce's firm again," he said, not quite meeting my eyes as he cut his salmon. "She really understands the demographic we're targeting." "Amanda Pierce," I repeated carefully, testing the name on my tongue like a foreign word. "I don't think you've mentioned her before." "Haven't I? We've worked together on several projects. Very professional, very results-oriented." Professional, results-oriented. The mother of his child. She sounds impressive. I'd love to meet her sometime. I said with a smile that felt like glass cutting my face. Maybe we could have them over for dinner. Rick's fork paused halfway to his mouth, a piece of salmon trembling on the tines. Them. Her family. Doesn't she have children? For just a moment his mask slipped. I saw panic flicker across his features. The same expression I'd seen on suspects when I testified about damning DNA evidence in court. Then the practiced charm reasserted itself, smooth as silk. I wouldn't know about her personal life. We keep things strictly business. Strictly business. With the mother of his secret daughter. The woman who'd been raising his child for 8 years while I struggled with phantom fertility issues. I excused myself to the bathroom and stared at my reflection, seeing not the devastated wife but the forensic scientist who'd built her career on methodical investigation and ironclad evidence. My emotional pain was overwhelming, yes, but beneath it lay something colder and more calculating. Rick thought he was playing chess while I was playing checkers. But he'd forgotten something crucial about the woman he'd married. I don't just find the truth. I weaponize it. Over the following weeks, I became a ghost in my own life, maintaining perfect normalcy, while systematically dismantling Rick's carefully constructed deception. My lab's resources, my professional network, and my expertise in genetic analysis became tools of investigation. The first step was confirming the genetic relationship beyond any possible doubt. I obtained DNA samples from Rick's parents during a family dinner, claiming I was working on an expanded ancestry analysis as a surprise gift for our upcoming anniversary. His mother was delighted by the idea, chattering about family history while I swabbed her cheek with clinical precision. Oh, Elena, what a wonderful idea. Rick will love learning more about his heritage. You know, his great-grandfather came from Ireland during the potato famine. If only she knew what heritage I was really investigating. Rick's brother David provided samples during a casual conversation about genetic health screening at a family barbecue. You know, Dave, with your family history of heart disease, you might want to consider genetic testing. I'd suggested, offering to run the analysis at my lab as a favor. He'd been grateful for the professional consultation, never suspecting his saliva would help me prove his brother's paternity of a secret grandchild. Within days, I had a complete genetic profile of the Hawthorne family, including markers from 3 generations. The results were devastating in their clarity. Not only was Lily Pierce definitely Rick's daughter, but the genetic analysis revealed she'd inherited several distinctive Hawthorne family traits, including a rare genetic variant that appeared in less than 2% of the population. The mathematical probability of error was essentially 0. More damning still, Lily had inherited Rick's distinctive jawline, the same green eyes that had first attracted me to him in graduate school, and what appeared to be the Hawthorne family's characteristic left-handed dominance. Looking at her school photos on Amanda's social media was like seeing Rick's childhood pictures with long hair and a different name. The genetic evidence was bulletproof. But I needed more than biology. I needed to understand the full scope of Rick's deception, the financial implications, and most importantly, his future plans. Financial investigation revealed the true depth of his betrayal. Through business consulting fees, marketing contracts, and shell company payments, Rick had funneled nearly $200,000 to Amanda Pierce over the past 8 years. Money that came from our joint accounts, our shared investments, our combined financial future. He'd been stealing from our marriage to support his secret family. The paper trail was complex but clear. Inflated marketing budgets, consulting fees for services that seemed suspiciously vague, and retainer payments that bore no relationship to actual work performed. Rick had been systematically embezzling from Hawthorne Development, which was funded partially by our joint assets, to provide for Amanda and Lily. But the discovery that finally pushed me past anger into something colder and more calculating came from Amanda herself. I'd been monitoring her social media carefully, looking for any additional evidence, when I found a series of private posts visible only to close friends. The privacy settings weren't perfect, and my expertise in digital research, A skill I'd developed for tracking genetic genealogy in criminal cases, revealed glimpses of her real thoughts about her relationship with Rick. Amanda Pierce believed Rick was going to leave me. She'd been waiting for 9 years, raising his daughter alone, building her business around his projects, all because Rick had promised her that when the time was right, he'd end his marriage and they'd be a real family. Her posts painted a picture of a woman desperately in love with a man who kept promising tomorrow. Elle asked again when Daddy is coming to live with us. She'd written 6 months ago. Told her soon, but honestly, how much longer can I keep saying that? Another post from just 3 weeks ago. R says he's finally ready to talk to you about divorce. After all these years, maybe we can stop hiding. Reading those posts felt like swallowing poison. Rick had been stringing Amanda along for nearly a decade, making promises he never intended to keep, using her hope of legitimacy to maintain her silence and compliance. Of course, he'd never intended to leave me. I brought social credibility, professional success, and financial stability to his empire. Elena Vasquez was the respectable wife who enhanced his reputation and opened doors in Chicago's elite circles. Amanda provided passion and excitement and gave him the child he'd apparently wanted, but Elena provided respectability. Rick had been playing both of us, but he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated what I was capable of when cornered. The deeper I dug into Rick's deception, the more I understood that this wasn't just about infidelity. This was about a man who'd built his entire life on compartmentalization and manipulation. He'd married me for what I could provide: professional credibility, social connections, financial partnership, while maintaining a completely separate emotional and biological relationship with Amanda. But the cruelest part was how he'd systematically destroyed my hope of motherhood while fulfilling that same desire with another woman. Every month that I'd wondered why we weren't conceiving, every doctor's appointment I'd suggested that he'd postponed, every moment of self-doubt and biological anxiety I'd experienced, all of it had been orchestrated by a man who'd already fathered the child he wanted with someone else. The psychological abuse was as devastating as the financial theft. Rick had weaponized my desire for children against me, using it to control our relationship timeline while ensuring it could never be fulfilled. I started keeping a detailed journal of evidence, approaching Rick's downfall with the same methodical precision I brought to forensic cases. Every financial transaction, every genetic marker, every social media post, every travel record. I documented it all with the thoroughness that had made my testimony devastating in criminal trials. But I needed more than evidence. I needed a plan that would expose Rick's deception completely while protecting myself legally and financially. The answer came from an unexpected source: Rick himself. 2 weeks into my investigation, he announced that he'd been asked to give the keynote speech at the annual Hawthorne Development Charity Gala, Chicago's premier real estate networking event, attended by developers, investors, city officials, and their families. This year's theme was Building Chicago's Future, and Rick had been planning his speech for months. It's going to be the perfect opportunity to announce our expansion into sustainable development, he told me over breakfast, his eyes bright with ambition. The mayor's going to be there, along with every major player in the industry. This could position us for the next decade of growth. What he didn't mention was that Amanda Pierce's firm was handling the marketing and public relations for the event. That evening, I received a call that seemed like divine intervention. The Chicago Forensic Science Association needed a last-minute replacement speaker for their presentation at the charity gala. The original speaker had been hospitalized, and they needed someone who could discuss recent advances in genetic analysis and their applications in criminal justice and family law. "We know it's short notice, Dr. Vasquez, but you're the most respected forensic geneticist in the city. Your expertise in complex paternity cases and family fraud would be perfect for our segment." I accepted immediately. The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in calculated preparation. I crafted my presentation with the precision of a prosecutor building a case, using anonymized case studies that would devastate Rick while maintaining professional credibility. Meanwhile, I continued my investigation, uncovering even more disturbing details about Rick's deception. Through careful analysis of travel records, credit card statements, and business expenses, I discovered that he'd been maintaining two completely separate lives with stunning attention to detail. He had different phones for different relationships, separate credit cards for personal expenses, and even maintained a small apartment across town that Amanda believed was a business office, but that seemed to serve as a private retreat where he could be Rick the father instead of Rick the husband. The apartment lease was in the name of one of his shell companies, furnished with photos of Lily and Amanda, toys and children's books, even a small bedroom that appeared to be decorated for a little girl's overnight visits. Rick had built a shrine to the family he'd chosen, hidden from the wife he'd deceived. But perhaps most damning was what I discovered about his recent behavior changes. The push for fertility testing wasn't random, it was calculated. Rick had been researching unexplained female infertility online, learning about the psychological impact of failed fertility treatments, even consulting with therapists about how to support a spouse through reproductive challenges. He'd been preparing to guide me through the emotional devastation of believing my body was failing us, all while knowing he'd made conception impossible through surgical intervention. The monster I'd married had planned every detail of my psychological destruction. As the charity gala approached, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. Rick hadn't just betrayed me. He'd stolen nearly a decade of my life, systematically abused my trust, and planned to continue that abuse indefinitely. But he'd made one fatal error in his calculations. He'd assumed that Elena Vasquez was too comfortable, too trusting, and too emotionally invested in their marriage to ever pose a real threat to his carefully constructed deception. He was about to learn how wrong he'd been. The night before the gala, Rick came home excited about his speech, practicing key phrases and gesturing enthusiastically as he described his vision for Chicago's development future. "This is it, Elena. This is the moment everything comes together. Tomorrow night, I'm going to announce partnerships that will transform not just Hawthorne Development, but the entire industry." I watched him rehearse his performance. This master manipulator, who'd spent years perfecting the art of deception, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "I'm proud of what you've built, Rick," I said, and meant it. He had built something impressive. A house of cards so complex and precisely balanced that its collapse would be spectacular. "Thank you for believing in me," he replied, kissing my forehead with what seemed like genuine affection. "I couldn't have done any of this without your support." Support. The word tasted bitter. I'd supported him while he betrayed me, believed in him while he lied to me, loved him while he stole from me. But tomorrow night, the bill would come due. The Palmer House Hilton ballroom buzzed with conversation as Chicago's real estate elite mingled over cocktails and hors d'oeuvres. I stood at the edge of the crowd, watching Rick work the room with his characteristic charm, moving from group to group with the practiced ease of a man who'd built his career on personal relationships and strategic networking. Across the space, Amanda Pierce supervised the event setup, elegant in a black cocktail dress that emphasized her delicate features and professional competence. She moved through the crowd with quiet efficiency, checking details and coordinating with hotel staff, while maintaining the kind of understated presence that made clients trust her implicitly. She was beautiful, I had to admit. Not in the dramatic way that stops traffic, but with the kind of refined attractiveness that photographs well for marketing materials and makes investors feel comfortable writing large checks. I could see why Rick had been attracted to her, and more importantly, why he'd chosen her to be the mother of his child. What I couldn't see was any resemblance to the woman who'd been waiting 9 years for a married man to keep his promises. But then, Rick had always been good at compartmentalizing. My presentation was scheduled for 8:30 p.m., right after Rick's keynote about sustainable development and community partnerships. I watched him take the stage, confident and commanding, speaking about building legacies and creating value that would last for generations. The future of Chicago development isn't just about buildings, Rick declared, his voice carrying easily across the ballroom. It's about partnerships built on trust, long-term commitments that benefit everyone involved, and the courage to make decisions that will still matter decades from now. The irony was suffocating. Here was a man speaking about trust and long-term commitments, while maintaining a decade-long pattern of systematic deception. Speaking about legacy while hiding his actual biological legacy from his legal wife. But Rick had always been gifted at performance. The room hung on his every word as he outlined his vision for sustainable development, innovative partnerships, and ethical business practices that would set new standards for the industry. At Hawthorne Development, we believe that success isn't just measured in profits, but in the relationships we build and the trust we earn, he continued, gesturing toward Amanda's team with professional acknowledgement. We're proud to work with partners who share our commitment to integrity and excellence. Partners. The word carried so much more weight than anyone in the audience realized. Rick concluded his speech to enthusiastic applause, accepting congratulations and handshakes as he made his way back to his table. For a moment, I felt almost sorry for him. He genuinely believed he'd built something admirable, that his professional success somehow justified or balanced his personal deceptions. He had no idea what was coming. When my turn came, I took the stage with the same calm professionalism that had carried me through 12 years of expert testimony in criminal cases. The presentation began innocuously enough. Recent advances in DNA analysis, the growing accessibility of genetic testing, the ways modern technology was revolutionizing both family law and criminal justice. Genetic evidence has become the gold standard for establishing biological relationships, I explained, advancing through slides that showed the evolution of DNA testing technology. What once required weeks of laboratory analysis can now be completed in hours, with accuracy rates that approach mathematical certainty. The audience listened politely, the kind of professional attention given to expert presentations at industry events. Most of them were probably thinking about networking opportunities or business deals rather than the technical details of genetic analysis. But that was about to change. The applications extend far beyond simple paternity testing. I continued, moving into more complex territory. Modern genetic analysis can reveal patterns of deception that span decades, uncover financial fraud disguised as legitimate business relationships, and expose systematic abuse disguised as marital partnership. I could see Rick shifting uncomfortably in his seat, though he probably attributed his unease to general anxiety about my presentation rather than specific concern about its content. Consider this case study, I said, advancing to a slide showing anonymized genetic profiles. The peaks and valleys of DNA analysis filled the screen, meaningless to most of the audience but devastating in their implications for anyone who understood genetic science. A married couple struggles with infertility for years. The husband consistently delays medical intervention, citing career priorities and timing concerns. The wife begins to blame herself, wondering if something is wrong with her reproductive system, adjusting her lifestyle, and considering invasive medical procedures to address what she believes is her failure to conceive. The room had begun to quiet, conversations trailing off as people sensed the shift in my presentation's tone from academic to personal. Meanwhile, genetic analysis reveals that the husband has fathered a child with another woman, and subsequently underwent sterilization to prevent future pregnancies. The husband's vasectomy, obtained immediately after his affair partner's pregnancy was confirmed, demonstrates not accidental infidelity, but premeditated reproductive fraud. Someone in the audience gasped. I could see Rick in the front row, his face pale in the spotlight glare, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. This case illustrates how genetic evidence can reveal not just biological relationships, but patterns of deliberate deception spanning multiple years. The husband's sterilization proves that the couple's infertility was not natural or accidental, but artificially created through surgical intervention designed to prevent conception while maintaining the facade of a couple trying to conceive. The ballroom had gone completely silent now, Hundreds of Chicago's business elite sat transfixed, beginning to understand that this wasn't an abstract academic presentation, but something far more personal and devastating. The financial analysis revealed systematic theft, marital assets diverted to support the secret family through shell companies and fraudulent business transactions. Over nearly a decade, the husband transferred approximately $200,000 from joint accounts to support his affair partner and their child, money that should have been used for the legitimate marriage. Rick started to stand, but I wasn't finished. Not even close. Perhaps most disturbing, recent evidence suggests the husband intended to blame his wife's fertility for their childlessness, potentially subjecting her to unnecessary medical procedures while knowing he was sterile by choice. The husband had researched the psychological impact of failed fertility treatments, preparing to guide his wife through the emotional devastation of believing her body was failing them. The ballroom erupted. Conversations exploded across the room as people connected the dots between my anonymous case study and the man who'd just finished speaking about trust and long-term commitments. Rick's business partners were staring at him with dawning horror. Amanda Pierce had gone white as marble, her elegant composure cracking as she realized her 9-year secret was about to become public knowledge. But I wasn't done. Not even close. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos like a surgical instrument, "I present this case not as an abstract legal curiosity, but as a personal testament to the power of genetic truth. Because sometimes the most important discoveries happen when we turn our professional expertise toward our own lives." I looked directly at Rick, who sat frozen in his chair like a deer in headlights, his carefully constructed world beginning to crumble around him. The subjects of this case study are Richard Hawthorne and Amanda Pierce. The child is 8-year-old Lily Pierce. The hidden vasectomy was performed 9 years ago at a private clinic in Nassau. The financial fraud totals $200,000 over 8 years. And the defrauded wife standing before you is Dr. Elena Vasquez Hawthorne. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Rick's world began to collapse, one domino at a time. The first domino fell immediately. Rick's business partner, David Chun, stood up so abruptly that his chair toppled backward. "You son of a bitch," he said, his voice carrying across the silent ballroom. "You've been stealing from the company to pay for your mistress?" The second domino, Amanda Pierce, who had been standing near the back of the room, suddenly rushed toward the stage. "You told me you were getting divorced," she screamed at Rick, her professional composure completely shattered. "You said Elena knew. You said she was okay with it. When I exposed my husband's deception in this very room 5 years ago, I wasn't seeking revenge. I was seeking truth. And truth, once revealed, has its own inexorable logic. It demands accountability, requires consequences, and ultimately creates opportunities for healing that deception never allows." After the ceremony, as I walked through the hotel lobby where Rick had once been one of Chicago's most powerful developers, I felt the profound satisfaction that comes not from destroying an enemy, but from building something meaningful from the ruins of betrayal. My phone buzzed with a text from a new client, a woman in Denver who suspected her husband of maintaining a secret family. Another victim of systematic deception who needed genetic evidence to expose financial fraud and reproductive abuse. Another opportunity to turn truth into justice. I smiled and headed toward my car, already planning the investigation that would give another woman the power to reclaim her life from lies. Rick had taught me that some people are capable of extraordinary deception, systematic cruelty, and calculated abuse of trust. But he'd also taught me something more valuable. That truth, carefully gathered and strategically revealed, is the most powerful weapon against those who would use lies to control and manipulate others. And sometimes, the most profound victories come not from destroying your enemies, but from transforming their cruelty into your purpose.